All right. Hello and happy Tuesday. Thank you all for joining the Alumni Society today for the latest installment of our Microlearning Series, which provides actionable advice and insights from members for members. I'm Christina Merrill, Member and Community Engagement and Communications Manager here at the Alumni Society and a proud graduate of Columbia. Today, I'm happy to welcome back member Bryant Galindo. Bryant is the founder of CollabsHQ. Bryant, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me back, Christina.
It's great to have you back with us today. Time permitting, we will open the floor for questions from the audience. So if you have a question for Bryant, feel free to go ahead and drop it in the chat and we'll try and get to it. And on that note, let's dive right in. So Bryant, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Bryant Galindo. I'm a first-generation Mexican-American, born and raised in Los Angeles, California. I went to Columbia University and got my master's degree in negotiation and conflict resolution. And for the past 10 years, I've been basically building out my business, working with different companies and business teams to help them resolve conflict and be better leaders.
Fantastic. And tell us a little bit more about what you do today. Who do you help and so forth?
Yeah, so I work as a mediator, an executive coach, and a consultant. I work specifically with startup teams, business teams, and any type of business partnership team as well. I help them negotiate disagreements, specifically in the millions of dollars range, as well as helping them as an executive coach become better leaders around their leadership communication.
Fantastic. And your first microlearning series session focused on negotiating tips. Today, we're going to focus on collaborative disagreements. What would you say are the major differences between negotiation and conflict resolution?
Yeah, I would say that a lot of conflict resolution borrows principles from negotiation, but not necessarily the other way around, so to speak. In negotiation, what you're looking to do is identify what people's interests and needs are in order to be able to compromise and reach a deal for mutual gain. Those elements are also present within conflict resolution, but you take it a step further. Because there's a disagreement and people are not on the same page, what you're trying to do is get to the deep core issue, which could be a need that's not being expressed, in order to see what kind of agreement you can have from that.
Excellent. And then why should businesses care about how they manage disagreements in the workplace?
Yeah, I think all of us could have a story or two, right, of how either a leader or someone in the workplace did not manage a disagreement effectively, and it causes low morale, low productivity, and it also has this effect on people's ability to actually get the job done. I remember reading a statistic that said US employees spend about 2.1 hours every week trying to navigate disagreements and conflict in the workplace. That's time that obviously could be used for other things. And then there's ancillary effects that come out from that. So I think businesses should really think about if they're really wanting to get more out of their employees, especially in an economic climate that has so much uncertainty, they should also look at, well, how are we disagreeing? Do people stay resentful? Are there frustrations? How are we allowing people to dialogue effectively, if not? And if so, how are we moving through it and building that trust that collaborative disagreements really generates when people are harnessing the positive aspects of conflict?
Fantastic. And then what are some examples of the situations that you've helped executives navigate as they relate to resolving disagreements?
Yeah, so because I work at the executive level, a lot of my clients come to me because they have a disagreement that they're trying to figure out between others with the same amount of power. So I work specifically with partnership disillusions, interpersonal disputes, equity restructuring conversations, which are really big because usually there's a lot of money on the line, and then some types of partnership divorces. And so that's kind of my bread and butter, the main level that people work with me. And then underneath that, sometimes I'll be brought in by HR. There's an employee discrimination dispute or a harassment dispute or some aspect that requires a restorative justice type of framework to kind of allow people to speak about things that might be really difficult, but still move through it more easily. So I'm brought in at different levels, but by far I work with leadership teams at the highest level in order to let's say an executive wants to leave and has a huge compensation package that he needs to negotiate, or there's sensitive confidential issues that they don't want to air out publicly, I'll be brought in to be able to mediate that dispute so that everyone feels like they've been heard, it's confidential, and then you are able to move forward effectively from there.
Incredible, incredible. And what are your top tips for creating more collaborative disagreements?
Yeah, I know, like you and I talked about this a lot, right? Because there's so much I could really talk about. But I wanted to bring up a slide real fast. So this is the collaborative disagreement model, and I wanted to keep it simple because there's so many frameworks out there. But what I really love about this framework and this model is that it shows that you need three things in order to create and harness the positive aspects of disagreements, which I term collaborative disagreement. You need to be able to demonstrate that you're understanding the other person. This is where active listening skills come in, reframing, summarizing, to really show, hey, I hear you and I understand where you're coming from. And also, as a second component, you need a dialogue. It needs to be a two-way street. Most often what I see executives and leaders get wrong is that they take a very top-down approach and they forget this component, which is that as you're talking about it and dialoguing and understanding, the other person feels like, hey, I have some skin in the game here. My voice is being heard. And that means that when you do have the understanding and the dialogue, you can then move forward with solutions. So, I think a lot of people, when they think about disagreements, they get really hard pressed. They want to move through it really fast because they're very uncomfortable. They don't like it. So they jump to the solutions. They're like, what can we do? But by shortchanging the process and not going through the understanding and the dialoguing, you then don't generate the trust, the creativity, and the growth that positive collaborative disagreements can have, which then at the end creates those shared goals that I think are so important for a lot of people. And so in the workplace, right, there's a level of interdependence that's really big. We all must work together in order to move through things. And what the collaborative disagreement model shows is that when you're learning these skills and you are trying to put them into practice, you need all three of those in order to be able to create that energy that could otherwise move the disagreement from unhealthy to healthy.
Love it. Love it. And then what should executives keep in mind when resolving disagreements?
I think I touched on it a little briefly, right? The power dynamics. That's really big. So I once was working with a team where it was a 4-person founder team of a startup here in Los Angeles. And one of the executives, unfortunately, was creating like a toxic work environment. He was kind of like a little bit jockey, a little bit of a bro, and he would just say things in team meetings, all hands meetings, that were really off-putting to the women on the team. It was borderline harassment in a way, but he just thought he was joking. So I was brought in to help mediate that issue. And what ended up coming about was that a lot of the women on the team felt like, because he was an executive, one of the founders of this startup that was growing rapidly, I might add, they didn't feel like they could really voice these things to him or didn't know how. And then when I voiced it to him, he was surprised. He was shocked. He was like, oh, I was just trying to make sure everyone felt, like they could crack a joke and, like this was a fun environment. And so there was an issue of perception there. And so part of the work was to help him understand where the other party was coming from, and then to help the other party feel like they had the power or the space to be able to talk about things. And so I think when a lot of executives or leaders are trying to resolve things because they have a million and one things on their plate, they may not think about the power differential, and also about actually taking the time to dialogue, to really understand before going into that solutions mindset that would otherwise kind of hamper things. And so for this team, or at least this company, what was really beautiful was that when I created an environment where they could talk about these things, well, one, the co-founder cried because he was just kind of shocked that he was having this negative effect. And he was just like, that wasn't my intended purpose. And then that human kind of reaction to the others on the team humanized him. They all thought he was a robot that worked long hours all the time. And so for him to be able to say something like that and then show genuine remorse, like transformed the team. They were like, okay, like we acknowledge your your apology. We understand you want to do better. Here's what we recommend. And then he ended up taking one of the recommendations. I continued working with him. And then everyone ended up harnessing those positive aspects, the trust, the creativity, and the growth, which then helped the company scale and get an additional round of investment.
I love it. That's such a great anecdote. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. And I love what you mentioned about, sort of creating this space for people to air their grievances and just be very candid about how they feel. It seems to start with that, right? It's that creating that safe space for people.
Yeah, and I think we're all yearning for a level of authenticity and vulnerability from our leaders, in more so than not, because so many of us are either scrolling on TikTok, right, or like doing X, Y, and Z on our phones, and everything just feels so curated. So when there is a level of realness, I think, well, no, not I think, I know that is what you can use to harness positive conflict resolution. It's why, and 9 out of 10 times in my mediations, I have someone cry, because it's almost like that cathartic release. It's like, wow, we are arguing over a $5 million equity restructuring, like kind of implication here. And yet really what I'm projecting on this conflict and this disagreement, as well as negotiation, is that I want you to see me, to value me, to understand my contributions. And I'm putting all of my eggs in this one basket. And so being able to get underneath that and really understand that and bring it out allows for the creativity that I think is so essential for successful conflict resolution. Because without it, we just stay hardened, we close our hearts, we close our minds, and we don't really want to help, figure out what is a mutual gain type of resolution.
Amazing, amazing. And then, how would you say, so the original question was, what should executives keep in mind when resolving disagreements? How would you say, how can not doing these things backfire, would you say?
Yeah, I think I touched on that briefly in the beginning, which is that it leads to low morale, low productivity. I think people don't want to be as effective in their jobs anymore. They kind of stop, what is it, quiet quitting, was the whole trend last year. I think that is a symptom of an organization or leaders that don't really navigate disagreements productively. And so without giving their employees voices, or even other people who are at the same level as them, what you end up breeding is just more resentment, more frustration. And there's a concept I talk about a lot with my clients around the conflict debt. As like any debt, right, you're borrowing against the bank. And what successful conflict resolution does, especially collaborative disagreements, is it gives you some social currency that you can then use when there is conflict later on. You're like, hey, I'm going to remove that from our bank right now, so that you can trust me that we're going to be uncomfortable together and get through it on the other side. But without that withdrawal, what you're doing is you're just taking more. You're just adding to the conflict debt, and it gets so big that one little issue that you thought was like, oh, that's kind of trivial, right, can turn into a big problem later on. And then that's where I think leaders get into really big, not mistakes, but headaches, so to speak. They're like, why aren't my people working as hard? It's because you haven't provided them the space sometimes to air out some of their grievances and to dialogue about it productively.
Wonderful. I love that bank analogy. Love it. And so when it comes to resolving disagreements at the executive level, what are some trends that you've seen recently?
Yeah, so because of the market forces, what I'm noticing, at least from my clients, is that they're either I feel like there's two banks, or like two kind of camps. One, going really fast. They're like, okay, we have this disagreement, we need it resolved now. Like, can we get on your calendar? Boom, 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 right? Whether it's trying to sell their company and they're getting acquired and they need to restructure the equity, they need it now. They need that done now. Or I have another camp, which is like, let's take our time. Let's not be really rash here. Let's really figure out what is the best deal. Let's look at the experts, let's bring in lawyers, accountants, bring in a mediator. And it's funny to have both different camps, right? Because you have different personalities as well. And so part of the trends that I'm seeing is that as a mediator, you have to just stay neutral, to it all, including scheduling, right? follow up, getting people on board. And what used to be, I think, a process that would take a week sometimes can get stretched up to 3 months. And I have to be really okay with that. And so part of what I'm seeing from executives is either they're going really fast and they want to execute really fast, or they're willing to stay slow and do their due diligence.
Amazing. Interesting. And then, so, we have almost all of 2024 before us. What tips do you have for executives who have disagreements with internal stakeholders this year?
Yeah, I would say read up, try to figure out like what is the best case scenario here and develop a strategy. One of the things that I start all my clients with is an assessment from Thomas Kilmann. It's called the Thomas Kilmann Conflict Instrument Mode. And it helps you with just 25 questions understand what your style of conflict is. And what's really great about that is it shows you that there's 5 different styles: competing, accommodating, avoiding, compromising, and collaborating. And each one has implications for how you talk about the difficult issue, as well as the strategies that you deploy when you are in conflict. So let's take, for example, an avoider. An avoider will most likely, as the name suggests, avoid a conflict. And so what could be perceived as either passiveness or not caring is actually their safety. They're like, okay, you just gave me a bunch of information. I need to go into my corner or my safe space or my room and really digest it before I can come back to you with an appropriate response. But for someone who's a competitor, who's much more like, hey, here's how I'm seeing it. Boom, boom, boom. Let's go really fast and like, let's figure it out. That could be off-putting, right? So then you get a clash of styles there. And so what I always recommend executives like learn your style and then understand maybe what's the team style, what's the organization style, because there are obviously team and organizational styles too, and then see where you need to modify your style and flex another one to be most effective. Because usually what happens with disagreements is that they're all based on a misunderstanding, usually from a clash of styles. So if you can really understand what that clash is and get to the heart of the conflict, you have a much more successful chance of creating that collaborative disagreement kind of atmosphere that you can then harness and then use that as like positive goodwill, that social currency that you might need later on when there's a bigger problem.
Incredible. Bryant, thank you so much. These were just such incredible insights. And thank you again for returning to this series and sharing your wisdom and your insights. I think you've given us a lot of food for thought today. So thank you so much. And a quick question, how can members get in touch with you?
Yeah, so they can reach out to me on my website at www.collabshq.com. They can also email me at bryant@collabshq.com. And just as a little tidbit, I forgot to mention, I'm also an author. I released my first book, The New Middle, Connecting Heart and Mind to Collaboratively Disagree, that talks about this model more so obviously than just this little chat. So if you are curious to learn more, you can also check that out on my website.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. To our audience, if you are interested in sharing your knowledge and insights in an upcoming Microlearning Series webinar, email us at members@thealumnisociety.com with your idea. Thank you all again for tuning in, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.